Change Working, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Change Working, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're talking about first order and second order change. This is a distinction I had not heard before, and while the principle may seem simple, I found it very useful and found myself rethinking strategically how to best approach the challenge that the client is facing. So I hope you find this as interesting as I did. So here is my conversation with James about first order and second order change.
So up until that point, I was just like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing. You know, I'm just throwing random stuff. Like, it's just random. I've got no way like calibrating like how this might work or anything like that. One of the first things that had me go, oh, right, I sort of got a sense of what I'm doing now was the first order and second order change distinction.
I don't even know what that is.
So basically, first order change is any change that you make that changes nothing, basically. So let's say like you and I are playing 100 games of chess, right? We've just played 100 games of chess and we keep racking up the pieces. Mm-hmm. Now, within that, each game is going to be different. We're going to have made different choices, made different moves, all of this. You're going to have won some, I'm going to have won some. You know, let's say we're roughly evenly matched. There's been a lot of change. The whole thing consists in change. And I might go, I'm going to take a different angle this time to beat Ruckus, right? And maybe it does give me an edge, but I'm not sure. But then we rack up again and we're playing again and you win a game. So we play and 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 nothing changes, even though the whole activity consists in change, right? So any change that doesn't change the system is a first order change. So human beings, we've got things like, let's say somebody is, like for years, I was trying to write a book. Mm-hmm. And I would always do it the same way, right? I've got to just knuckle down and write, right? I really got to focus, got to carve out the time. But it was all just shifting the pieces around in the game of not writing a book.
Right.
So what happens is with a first order change, the logic of the system runs the system. So there's a certain logic to playing chess. We call it the rules of chess. You can make all sorts of changes within the rules of chess and you're still playing chess, right? So when people get caught, they get caught in the logic of the system, right? Let's say someone's got insomnia and they go, this insomnia, I need to do something to fix this insomnia because I'm desperate. So I try this, I try that, I try the other thing, I try that. Now I'm trying this, now I'm trying that. But all of those are born out of desperation, and it's the desperation itself that is perpetuating my insomnia, right? So it doesn't matter how many different changes I make, so long as they all come from the thing that is making the insomnia perpetuate, right? So I have to go, I have to find a way outside. So the rule with, as soon as you've got a system where the attempted solutions are part of the problem pattern, and every imagined solution is, then you know it's like it's got its own internal logic that perpetuates it. So instead of trying to make changes within the logic of the system, you have to change things through a creative act outside the logic of the system, right? That means people need to do things that are radically different and probably don't make sense. If they immediately make sense, then they sit within the logic of the system. And so they're just part of what wants to perpetuate, right? So if you look at Erickson's always trying to get people to do this crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense. And people go, but that doesn't make sense. It's like, yes, that's the point. The point is as soon as you bust the logic of the system, now this starts to go into some of the Mike Levin stuff as well about novel solutions, right? Intelligence on a most basic level is actually very adaptive in and of itself. So it can become maladaptive when a memory or a set of rules gets the system caught up. It's like we come up with a solution that makes sense and works with us, but that solution keeps us in its grip. That belief about how things are keeps us in its grip. And if we can release that, we can reconnect with our adaptive intelligence and come up with new solutions that we would never have otherwise thought about. So you can fit this with hemispherics. Like the left hemisphere runs on its own logic. It knows what it wants. It knows how to get it. It thinks it does anyway. And if it's wrong, it will persist anyway. Right? The right hemisphere is open to receive. It's adaptive, deals with new possibility. There's a trade-off to this, because if I know how to do something in a left hemisphere way and it's working, it's great. It's super, super fast. I don't want to have to come up with a new adaptive way of doing something. But when that thing stops working, we don't let go of the grip. So the logic of the system perpetuates a class of solutions that do not solve the problem and usually just increase frustration and entrenchment. So what's basically needed is a creative act outside the logic of the problem. Have you ever seen the 9-dot problem? It's a problem with a very simple solution that most people never get on their own if they've never seen it before.
This is Ruckus jumping in real quick, because in a moment, James is going to spoil the 9-dot problem solution. So if you've never heard of the problem before and you want to experience it for yourself, I invite you to pause the podcast right now, go look it up, and then come back. Okay, let's continue the conversation.
In order to solve the problem, there needs to be a creative act outside the logic of the problem. The vast majority of people will assume that they have to stay inside the box. Now, it's never said, it's never stated, but there's something about the pattern of the box that suggests to people, oh, that's a box.
Right.
So when people get that, and actually this is the origin of the term thinking outside the box.
Ah, that's where that came from.
That's where that comes from. Because in order to solve the 9-dot problem, you have to think outside the box.
Ah,
right?
That's so cool.
Right. If you believe that that's a box and you cannot go outside the box, even though that's not been stated, but if that's part of your assumptive set, you will go on forever and ever and ever. Now, every combination you try is a first order change because it stays within the parameters of the assumed rules, but they are not really the rules. They're just the assumed rules. Right. So in order to get a solution, you have to think outside the box. You have to do something outside of the rule set. You have to break the rules. So if your unconscious rules about how things work, what is or isn't so, how you have a problem unconsciously rendered up, if those rules contain a pathway through to a solution for you, you'll probably find it and probably find it quite quickly. If you're stuck, it suggests that by the rules of first order and second order change, it suggests that you're trying to come to an outcome that the rules that you hold do not allow for, or have you engage in activities that are counterproductive. So, a classic example might be you get dynamics between people. You get a couple and one is slightly more withdrawing and the other one wants a little bit more attention. So they come in and the other one pulls away, and they go in and the other one pulls away. They go in, the other one pulls away. That one's trying to get closer, one of them's trying to get space. And then the one that's trying to get closer, in the end, in order to get that closeness that they want, they have to stop trying to get that closeness that they want. Right? And maybe they need to create a little bit more space, be a bit more chill, then the other one might come in. Right? So they've got a rule set that just keeps perpetuating the game. I want closeness, so I move towards. So you get these, and like when you get someone caught in a set of first order changes, you have what's called the more pattern. So it pays. What Erickson used to do is he would find out, well, what's the pattern? What are you doing to fix the problem? What are your best intentions? And he used to say to people, I'm not all in with saying this, but like he would say to people, what's your problem? And they go, well, they tell him and they go, and your best thinking has got you nowhere. Right? He would say that. Right? Your best logic, your best thinking has currently got you nowhere. So are you willing to do something that is radically different or completely different? Now, this is one of the reasons why I think that hypnosis and trance work, even a thing in and of itself, is super valuable and works really well. Now, if you particularly take Erickson's approach, Erickson will often start out by saying, there is nothing that you need to do right now. There's nothing that needs to happen. You don't even need to listen to the sound of my voice because your inner mind will hear what it needs to hear or whatever. Or he'd say your unconscious mind. Now, what he's doing is he's getting people to stop doing. It's a major, major piece of Erickson's work is stop doing and start allowing, right? There's nothing you need to do. You start allowing. Because now if you think about it in terms of hemispheres, the right hemisphere, typically, in a typically wired person, is the doing hemisphere. It's the one that has rules and logic and what needs to happen and an existing template around what is or isn't so and what sorts of things make sense and what sorts of things don't make sense. So that's the doing hemisphere. And what Erickson's doing is getting people to stop doing and allow themselves to fall into the being hemisphere, which is the trance, and the creative unconscious mind, and just allowing things to happen, allowing things to unfold. The reason for that is the thing that keeps people stuck in first order change, the perpetuate system, is the left hemisphere logic of the system. So even just falling out of that and attending to the material differently creates the potential for new solutions, new categories of solution to come about that were blocked out by the original rule set. Now, people don't know what their rule set is, but their rule set will block out. And if you're doing change work people, for example, who do not buy into a particular approach, context is everything. Most people miss this. People have context blindness. So if you've got somebody come in and they come and see you as a change work practitioner, and they've already got a whole bunch of ideas about what makes sense, what doesn't, they're going to vet your input according to their current understandings. It can be quite slow going because they're not willing to take a leap into the weird, right? Now, anything that's outside the current logic of the system is going to be weird. By definition, it's going to be weird, right? It doesn't fit the current logic. One of the advantages of doing change work under, say, a hypnotherapy frame or something like that is people come in expecting something weird and illogical. So it gives you a lot of freedom to dive straight to that point without having to open somebody's mind to something. Right now, if you're working in, say, the context that I work in with the police, some people are quite open-minded, right? They're like, oh, I've tried everything. I don't know, just whatever. They're quite open-minded. Some people are not open-minded. They're like, well, I know pretty much what's what. I know what's important, what's not important. So this is always the case. You always need a creative act outside of the logic of the system. Now, if you look at all therapists at work, what they all do is they get people to do things that are outside of the logic of what they would normally do. Those that don't do this rarely get decent change happening. Look at IFS. I mean, for most people, it's a pretty weird paradigm, right? So the whole thing is creative acts outside of existing logic sets. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And as soon as people do that, their creative mind gets involved again. I mean, nobody could do something nobody could be a client in an IFS session without participating creatively.
Right.
You can't do it. It cannot be done. Because you have to put the experience together in a meaningful way throughout the facilitation. So in the end, this is quite, I think, a significant thing in terms of change work. It's knowing right off the bat, we have to get crazy. We have to get illogical. We have to get out there. And of course, if sometimes that's easy if somebody comes in expecting that from you because of the kind of practitioner you are. But if someone doesn't expect it, then you have to get crazy and you have to get out there without losing them. So the first order change, second order change thing is, to me, is a relief, because a lot of the time people go, what's the correct thing to do? They assume there's some sort of process that has its own logic that is correct. It is not doing correct logical things. It is doing illogical, creative things. Right? So there is no correct logical process that works in a particular way. That is the enemy of change work, is logic and sequence and these sorts of things. I'm not saying that somebody who runs a sequence might not run that sequence and encourage that person to step outside of their existing frameworks. Right? That's another way of putting it. Right? People have got existing frameworks. When they're inside of that existing framework, any changes they make inside of that framework is a first order change. Any change outside is a second order change. So we can play chess over and over and over, and we can go, this is getting nowhere, right? I can't walk away from this until I've beat Ruckus 10 times in a row. But I can't do it. So I stay in the game, I stay in the game, I stay in the game. It's actually, do you know what? We could change the rules of chess. Or we could play checkers. Or we could get up and go make some lunch. Or we could go out and climb a mountain or just do anything else. And then that disappears, right? Maybe I've got a rule that says I must beat ruckus. That's one of my personal rules. That's part of my own logical framework. Until I let go of that rule, perhaps, and go, oh, it turns out I didn't need to beat ruckus in order to have a good life. You know, and go do something else. But people get stuck in this repeating game. I must get it like this. It must be like this. So often when I'm listening to a client, I'm listening for that rigidity of framework, rigidity of worldview. And I'm like, if someone's got a really super rigid framework and super rigid worldview, and they go, this is the logic of the system, I've got all the logic nailed down and worked out already. I'm like, oh man, there's red flags everywhere here. Where is the space for a creative act outside the logic of the system? There isn't one, right? So how are we going to do the work when the work is predicated upon a creative act outside the logic of the system? I think it's a super valuable thing because it's like, oh my God, you know, this is why I never understood it. But when I first came to NLP, one of the basic presuppositions is if what you're doing isn't working, do something different, anything different. I was like, I hate that, right? I want to do something that makes sense. Yeah, but if it makes sense, it won't work. Because it means it's already operating according to the existing logic of the system that has been perpetuating. So you'll have heard me talk about this in different ways when I talk about being recruited by the problem. This is what I'm talking about, recruited by the logic that is keeping the problem going. And this is where like something like IFS has got built-in mechanisms that automatically depotentiate the first order structures. Because what you get is always like this part hates that part, right? It wants that part gone. That antagonism is a part of the existing logic of the system. Now, if you ask, it's like when you're doing clean language and someone says, I have this heavy knot inside of me, and there's a heavy knot inside of you, and what would you like to have happen? I want to get rid of it. That's always the way. So the first order change that perpetuates is the change of constantly trying to get rid of it. I must not feel this. I must not have this. This is bad. That's all part of the logic. So if somebody says, I want to hire you to get rid of this thing, I know I'm being recruited to dance the first order dance that leads to no change. Right? Now, if you say, but here's what we have to do, and you explain it to someone, some people will get that. But in a way, you're appealing to logic again. And actually, what you really want to get away from is away from logic and into creativity, into creative acts, into creative engagement. So IFS is doing it straight away because it's changing the frame right off the bat. Then it's changing the nature of the relationship from one of antagonism to one of open communication. So you've got these significant second order changes built in to something like IFS. So even though you don't know that it's there, people doing it may know I've heard of first order change, second order change, but it completely fits the picture. Now, like some people go, well, if you look at all therapies, I'll go, what's the thing that hangs them all together? I think there's a pretty good bet that first order change, second order change is the golden thread that ties them all together. There's a book on the topic that's called The Golden Thread because they talk about it being the golden thread that ties all workable therapies that may look completely different because they're doing it in different ways, but they're all getting people out of the existing logic that is perpetuating the problem into a fluid creative engagement that goes beyond, or into doing things that are different. And a lot of, and this is, by the way, how reframing works. One of the reasons I want to bring this in more explicitly is because if you start getting into reframing, conversational hypnosis, people go, well, how does that work? It's because you are offering a different conceptual framework, a different logical framework, a different set of rules. It's like changing the rules to chess when you successfully reframe. And reframing is an interesting thing because if you look at 6-step reframing, which is non-content reframing, Richard Bandler and John Grinder called this, nobody ever asks, why is it reframing? And it's because you are giving a different conceptual model for how things work. It's the same conceptual model, the original 6-step reframe, basically that IFS works by. There's parts. There's parts that have positive intentions that have been doing things for reasons. And we want to give them different things to do and have them find there are different ways to achieve things. So it's got that same parts reframe. So even as soon as somebody starts to think about themselves in terms of parts and the interaction of parts, they're already playing a different game from the game they were playing before. So the aim is always to get people to play a different game and to play it fully and play it creatively and play it full out. Then, going back to Ericksonianism, the creative unconscious mind will start to produce difference. And what we want to do is get that difference and blow on it and bring it out. So for me, this is why first order change, second order change is a major piece that kind of underpins everything. You start going, oh, well, that's why that works. And they look nothing like each other. Because they both broke the rules of the original perpetuating system. We're always moving, we're always breathing. So how is it the patterns that perpetuate? And then there's these other patterns that don't seem to perpetuate, that seem to lead to difference and change. So what's the difference between change that keeps things the same and change that leads to things playing out differently across time? That's why I've used this term patterns that perpetuate and turning them into patterns that play through. The question is, how do we do it? We do it by getting outside of the logic of the original dance that's perpetuating. And there's lots of ways of doing this. So if you start to look at Erickson's work, part of Erickson's conversational approach is reframing, basically. It's taking people into different organizations of reality, because those organizations operate like the rules of the game. So to go back to the chess metaphor, there's a move in chess called castling, whereby you do this thing and in one move you can switch the king out and put him behind a row of pawns and out hops one of the rooks. This move, I don't know how old it is. It's only a few hundred years old, but for the majority of the history of chess, this move did not exist. It was not part of the rules of chess. It was added in to speed games up. So at some point, the rules of chess got changed to speed the game up. So rules to games get changed, and they changed the whole game. Like if you take something like mixed martial arts, people, when that started out, the UFC, the rules were no biting, no eye gouging. That was it. And then other rules came in, and that significantly changes what moves are permitted. And, it tends to favor certain styles and certain approaches over other things, depending on the rules of the game. When you change the rules of the game, the whole thing changes. This is why if you look in, to use a martial arts reference now, we're going to get deep into violence. If you look at Muay Thai, Thai boxing, and then you look at Burmese boxing, Lethwei, they're just over the board from each other. They are largely the same-ish, but not. So one of the differences, and forgive me, sensitive listeners, one of the differences in Lethwei, headbutts are allowed. In Muay Thai, they are not. And it changes everything, because the classic Thai double plum clinch, which you're completely safe doing and is a mainstay of Muay Thai, leaves you very vulnerable to headbutts in Lethwei. So people cross over the border and think, oh, well, I'll just take my skills across. They have to change things quite significantly. They could go from being a champion to a loser in a blink of an eye because they haven't adapted to the new rule set. So as soon as you change the rules of the game, you change the outcomes in a game. Mostly, when people are trying to fix their problems, they have an unconscious set of rules that they do not change. They keep the same set of rules, and they keep trying to get to an outcome by that set of rules. Now, I want to emphasize here, it is quite possible, if your rules are appropriate, that you will get to your outcome. So you can tell if your rules work well because you get the outcomes you want. You move easily towards your outcome. But when you find yourself blocked or in a repeating pattern, and this is in any problem, in any domain. So it could be a problem in a behavioral domain, or it could be a problem in an emotional domain, or in a relationship domain, or whatever. But if you're trying, if everything that you do or apparently don't do doesn't change the problem, the clue is there that you're stuck in a set of rules. You're stuck within a particular thinking box that does not contain the answer within it. So you need to get out of it, but you cannot logic your way out of it because the logic only applies to the logic system itself. You cannot logic your way beyond your current logic system, right? You can only creatively engage beyond the realms of your current logic system. So this is what all effective therapists, all effective change work methods have in common. is things that go beyond the rules of the existing system. Right? You have to get people to engage outside of their current game.
So when someone comes to you, or you were talking earlier about the way a potential client tells you what it is they want to work on, gives you a clue as to how, you talk about being recruited by the problem. Does that determine whether you decide to even see them as a client, or is that just knowing going in, this is what I'm going to be dealing with?
It can do. So the way I tend to deal with this now is if I see somebody I read an email and they've laid it out for me and I'm like, ooh, lots of rigidity here. The clues I'm looking for is, do they think they know what's what? A particular red flag is when they tell me very specifically what it is they want me to do for them. Because that means they've already decided they know what the answer is. And I trust their inner creativity enough to know that if they were right about that, they wouldn't need me. So I know they're stuck and they think they know the way forward, but their map of the way forward isn't helping them. And as the old saying goes, if you ain't part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Right? So in this instance, that which is not part of the genuine solution is part of the problem. But also there's the inverse on that. You can think you're part of the solution and be part of the problem. That's the problem with that phrase. If you ain't part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And sometimes if you think you're part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I'm looking for clues in that initial email, in that initial interface. It's like, right, how much do they think they know exactly what needs to happen? How much rigidity am I seeing? If there's a sort of open-mindedness, I'm very happy to work. I'm very happy to work with anyone. There is a problem, I will say, sometimes in the way that people are encouraged to advertise their services as hypnotherapists. This is less the case with coaches. It's like, what do you want? I will get it for you.
Right.
So, for example, look at Paul McKenna's books. I can make you thin. I can make you rich. I can make you. It's like we pick the solution ahead of time and we're going to go for that. Now, the problem with that kind of solution focus, strong solution focus, is it tends to engage the left hemisphere. And as soon as someone engages their left hemisphere, it fires up their logic sets. A certain way of advertising hypnotherapy tends to encourage people to get locked into sort of problem logic sets. There's a counterbalance to that in that if you're doing, I guess, trance work and stuff like that, you ought to be getting people to fall out of that, but there can be a bit of a problem up front. So oftentimes, think about it like this. I'll say this again. The solution is a creative act outside the logic of the problem. That means the real solution will be a surprise to you. So if you think you know what it is ahead of time and nothing but that is going to satisfy you, you're getting in your own way. Right? And I'll say that to anyone who's like looking to hire a therapist or a change work practitioner or anything like that. But actually it's true for all of us in life. And this is why I've often said before, how do you hold an outcome? And I like that idea. I got that from Stephen Gilligan, but supposedly Errol Flynn said, you hold a sword like you hold a baby bird, not so tight you crush the life out of it, not so loose that you let it fly away. You want to hold an outcome that way. Because if you hold it too tightly, too much in your existing ideas, too much in your existing logic sets, unless it's already coming into fruition, then those logic sets, that tight grip is getting in the way. But on the flip side, you don't necessarily want to have no direction. So you do want to have an outcome, but it needs to be loose enough and have enough space in it, be adaptive, be flexible, be open to creative adaptation. And you and I have had this conversation before about, the movie will let you know what it wants to be. And you want to be intentional, but not have that intention be so rigid and so stifling that it squeezes out creativity.
So if you've got a client that you've decided to see them, but you know that they are rigidly locked into a solution or their problem like we're talking about, are you explicitly coaching them towards the idea of that we're got to go outside of that, or are you doing that without them knowing what you're doing?
So I've done this in different ways at different times, and I used to be a lot more explicit about it. And now I'm a lot less explicit about it most of the time. The trouble is, if you say to somebody, let's say they're caught in their left hemisphere logical thinking. So you think, well, I'm going to pace and lead. I'm going to give them a very logical presentation that's going to expand the logic. So pacing and leading, pacing someone's worldview and expanding it out, it tends to expand the logic of their system, which can work well, but they can still be caught in a set of logical renderings. So you want to create ways to just get beyond that. And the way I think about it now is you want to get beyond it as fast as possible, I think, in sessions, ideally. So what I will tend to do now, and again, context is significant. So I'm talking here about now, I'm working with people who come and see me who do not know what to expect. They come along expecting to have a very sensible, logical discussion that will be helpful for them. Right? The discussion that will make sense for them. They're not coming along expecting to do crazy things. So I do want to open this door. And this is where I'll use things more like Erickson would use. Now, Erickson very quickly say, your best thinking is what's got you here. So you might be open now to doing something very different, right? All right, sometimes I'll just say, look, you've probably got a good logical idea of what needs to change for you here. But I'm going to suggest to you that trying to apply any kind of logic to this doesn't make sense. In fact, it's the most illogical thing you can do. And they go, oh, I'll say this problem that you've got, is it logical? And they go, and mostly they'll say no. Let's say they've got, so I was working with somebody the other day, they've got like a PTSD symptoms, they've got a lot of threat response activation whenever they find themselves in certain situations. And they're going, I don't get it. It's just silly. I know I'm fine in that situation. Right. So when I said to her, like, so this response you're getting, is it logical? Right. No, it doesn't make any sense. It's got nothing to do with your mind. It's everything to do with how your body has been remembering this. Right now, that's an immediate shift. Oh, it's not about the mind. It's about the body. Right now, I want to get enough buy-in for that. I say, think about it. Where are you having this experience? It's in your body, right? Your body's got more intelligence within it than you know. And it's made some decisions about some things. So the solution to this, you can't control this. You've tried, haven't you? Yes, you can't control this. We need to be able to kind of connect in a little bit more, have a different kind of conversation with what's going on in your body. And this is going to seem weird. I just say it. This is going to seem weird, right? So I am sort of explicit, but I'm not going to go necessarily down a really deep rabbit hole of explaining it and everything. I just want to get enough buy-in to do things that are different. Now, often as well, once we get into this, so this is going to be weird. I'm going to invite you to do some things, pay attention certain ways, connect with certain things. And my invitation to you is to just go with it and make the best of it. And notice what it is that you notice as we go. The signature pattern of first order change creating a pattern that perpetuates is the more structure. The more I try and do this, the more it evades me, right? The more I try and control my eating, the more I end up binging, that sort of thing. One thing might be, I just mentioned eating and binging. So one of the things that people often do when they're trying to control their eating, and I've seen this pattern so many times, particularly back when I was doing more hypnotherapy, so I get a lot of weight loss clients, is I get people that would try and control their diet. They would repress their desires to eat things as like a repression strategy. They would often have in their language, a lot of language like, I can't eat that, right? So they would have a victim sort of relationship. They would victimize themselves. It's the relationship. They would victimize themselves in relationship to the fact that they were depriving themselves of eating these things in order to get an outcome. And then they would crack and they would eat, and then they would really eat because the restraints are off. And it's just like, well, I've done it now, so I might as well make the most of it. And then they would castigate themselves afterwards, go, oh, what the hell's wrong with you? And there's a part that wants to beat them back into shape again. So like your love of IFS will recognize that as a managerial part. Wants to come back in. And then round they go again. Around they go again. So the more they try and control their eating, with the methods they try and control their eating, right? The same managerial part trying to control the eating, and it may have some adaptiveness and creativity, but basically it's the same managerial part. And the more they do it, the more they perpetuate the cycle. So the more pattern. I remember working with somebody years ago on this, and I think this created a reasonably significant breakthrough. I remember saying to them, so when you eat, you're eating for medicinal reasons. You're eating to kind of heal your soul, right? And they went, yes. And I said, I'm going to suggest something radical to you. Are you ready? They said, yes. I said, so when you eat for these healing medicinal reasons, how about you just let them be healing and medicinal? Right? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, at the moment, every time you eat, you give yourself a right good kicking. And how do you feel when you give yourself a good kicking? I feel lousy. And why were you eating? Because I felt lousy. Right? So you're eating to find your way to some healing, some peace and well-being. Let the medicine do its work. Let the medicine do its work. Would you be willing to do that? They said yes. So as soon as they guiltlessly allowed themselves to eat and just enjoy it and let the medicine do its work, let themselves feel good, which is what they were trying to get to, they ate half as much without trying. Because you've broken the more pattern, right? You've outframed it. You've got a different or reframed it. So I've brought in this idea of the medicine. Let it do its work, right? It's trying to do something. Let it do what it's trying to do. You could say it's a reframing. You could go, no, that's what was happening with the pattern. Right? It's just a metaphor for the pattern of taking the medicine but not letting it do its work. So that changed the conditions of the game and therefore got like a second order change. Now, I just want to say something. That, again, would have been probably a largely conversational hypnosis session. And if somebody says, what is conversational hypnosis? Conversational hypnosis is reorganizing reality. It is changing the conceptual renderings that underpin the current game. It's offering a different set of conceptual renderings and inviting somebody to try those on, to experience the world through those. Now, it's got to be that they try them on and experience the world through those, not just intellectually think about them. If you offer a new organization of reality or a new set of ideas for somebody to live into, and they don't live into them, they go, oh, well, it's kind of interesting to see how that might work. They're outside of it, running it through their intellect. So even though it's conversational, you are actually getting somebody to try that reality on. They're having like a micro trance of that new reality in the moment, even though you haven't framed it as a formal trance induction or anything like that. You're inviting them into something different. And you see it when somebody goes there and they go, oh, and they get an immediate shift in felt sense. That shift in felt sense shows that they tried it on. They went into the different organization of reality. That's what we're doing when we're doing conversational hypnosis. So it isn't just talking. It's inviting people into different conceptual renderings and having them experience that shift. And the way, like as we teach in client shifts, when people get that shift, you can go, so what is it you're noticing now? And they go, oh, or you can see the shift in their body and you say, so what just happened? Right? Or what are you connecting with now that's different from before? These differencing questions. That's how you basically do conversational hypnosis. I'll just add to that. I think if somebody doesn't get the first order change, second order change distinction, it's less easy to make sense of what you're doing with conversational hypnosis. Because what you're always doing is changing the rules. Always. You are not simply suggesting different actions and activities within the current rules. And maybe this is something that really highlights the difference between perhaps some approaches to classical suggestion work versus the Ericksonian approach. So a classic approach might be, from now on, every time you enter a room, you will feel confident. That's just an instruction. That's not a change in the programming. That's just telling you what's going to happen. Now, why? Oh, because you're being hypnotized. Sometimes this works because the whole thing, if somebody buys into it, is still a creative act outside of the logic of the system.
Right.
But instead of just going for from now on, it's a bit like, to go back to the chess example, from now on, you will always play the Stafford Gambit when this happens, right? It's like, okay. But the Ericksonian approach doesn't tell you what you're going to do. It just changes the rules you operate by. That's the difference. And to me, I genuinely believe that's the most powerful way of doing it. Because if you give here's what you're going to do, it's like, well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But why? Oh, because a hypnotist told me, or because whatever. But as soon as you see something differently, as soon as the rules have changed, you play the game differently. You cannot not play the game differently because the rules have changed. So a successful reframe, a successful change in the rules creates different behavior by default.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And I hope that if you've never heard of this distinction before, that you found it as insightful as I did. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.
Change Working is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.